Good morning and welcome to the Foreign Press Center. We're pleased to welcome Special Representative for the NPT, Adam Scheinman, to brief you this morning. After his remarks, we'll have a session for Q&As. I would request that you speak into the mic when it is presented to you and state your name and media affiliation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you and good morning. Let's make a few comments at the top here before we open it for questions. I think, as everyone here knows, the NPT Review Conference opens up on Monday. It's a month-long event based in the United Nations, and it's a conference that's held every 5 years per the terms of the treaty, principally to review the performance of the treaty and perhaps think about recommendations that can be taken to strengthen it. It is very much a U.S. view that this treaty is a success. It is nearly universal and has done well to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons to many additional states and to avoid the risks of nuclear war that would come with that. We think all NPT parties benefit from it, both in terms of security and even developmental assistance. This treaty is the only legal framework we have in which the 5 states that are acknowledged in the treaty as having nuclear weapons are committed to nuclear disarmament. It is a common international basis for dealing with compliance challenges, as we have in Iran and North Korea, and for ensuring that the peaceful uses of nuclear energy are made available to states around the world. The treaty faces challenges, but it's proven durable and is at the center of nearly every global effort to reduce nuclear dangers, and we think it's important. The review conference, as we head into it, the United States will have a number of goals. Most significantly, we seek to broaden international support for all 3 of the treaty's pillars, its disarmament, nonproliferation, and peaceful uses pillars. And we'll do that by reinforcing the President's commitment to seek the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons. We've made significant progress to reduce nuclear weapons and negotiate cuts with Russia. The President has said that we're prepared to go farther and negotiate additional cuts with Russia to reduce strategic nuclear weapons, and we very much hope and continue to encourage Russia to take up that offer. We'll seek progress on a fissile material cutoff treaty that would end the further buildup of nuclear stockpiles for use in nuclear weapons. And we're prepared to, and we've in fact started a new partnership that would look at technology needed for future arms control agreements. And we'll be talking about that at this review conference. We'll encourage strong support for the nuclear safeguard system that is run by the International Atomic Energy Agency, and highlight remaining noncompliance challenges to the treaty. As the President has said, rules must be respected and enforced. We will highlight U.S. support for peaceful uses of nuclear energy and encourage others to do so. We're very proud of U.S. efforts in this regard. We've contributed resources, including $50 million to a new IAEA Peaceful Uses Initiative that was launched in 2010. And this is a program that is providing use of nuclear techniques to deal with very serious problems in the third world, whether that is addressing cancer and disease, monitoring disease, ensuring security for food supplies around the world. And it's very important that these continue. They're very much part of the NPT bargain. We understand and recognize that this review conference, like any review conference, will be difficult. There are frustrations over the pace of disarmament. There is the unfortunate example set by Russia in its aggression against Ukraine, and there is certainly increasing and continuing interest in pursuing a Middle East zone free of weapons of all mass destruction. These are tough issues. They've been on the NPT agenda for a number of years. They'll remain there, and we look forward to discussing them in New York. So I will stop there and take questions.
Hi there. Thanks so much for the briefing. James Reinl from Al Jazeera. The question is on the subject that you got onto at the very end there, the nuclear weapons free zone for the Middle East. the outcome of the previous conference in 2010 was to have a special meeting on that. It was one of the commitments, and that hasn't happened. Can you talk about that a little and possibly respond to suggestions that through US tacit support for Israel's nuclear program and also the Iran deal that you guys are negotiating, you're in some ways pushing concerned Arab states towards nuclearization?
Yes, thank you. The question of a Middle East zone free of weapons of mass destruction. There was an agreement in 2010 that we would work to hold an initial conference that should involve all states in the region, and it should be focused on the establishment of a zone free of weapons of mass destruction and systems for their delivery. Over the last 2 years or so, the United States has made a very serious effort working with other partners. We call them conveners. This would be the United Kingdom, Russia, and the United Nations, and a facilitator who was named for this process, Ambassador Jaakko Leava from Finland. We have made major efforts to bring the parties together so that this conference could take place. And we've had some progress. There have been a number of regional consultations that have involved Arab states, as well as Israel, which is not a party to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. I think the process that has occurred has been a useful one in helping the various states of the region understand the perspectives that each would bring to achievement of a zone. But we've yet to have the regional states reach agreement on the terms for the conference, but we'll continue to do that. Conversations will continue over the course of the review conference, and our hope is that there can be agreement to hold this conference soon. But that would require that the states of the region, the states of the Middle East, have agreement on the terms for the conference. This isn't something that we can impose from the outside. These arrangements only work if they're based on voluntary participation. We have the example of regional nuclear weapon-free zones around the world. They're all based on the fundamental concept that these are arrangements that are voluntary and freely arrived at by the regional states. So our goal is to find a way to encourage the regional states of the Middle East to reach agreement on the terms for the conference, and that very much remains our goal. However you'd like to.
Hi, my name is Ken Okasaka from Japan's Kyodo News. Thank you for this briefing. There's, as you are aware, a growing concern and the frustration that the pace of the disarmament, nuclear disarmament, is too slow, and the nuclear powers are spending a vast amount of money on the modernizing the nuclear weapons. How do you respond to these voices especially from the non-nuclear powers?
Well, we would like to see more progress on nuclear disarmament. This is very much a U.S. policy and interest. We negotiated one round of nuclear reductions with Russia, the New START treaty that was completed several years ago, and implementation of that treaty has continued, even though we're in the midst of a difficult patch of relations with Russia. We think we can go farther, and the President had offered to pursue another 1/3 reduction of strategic nuclear weapons with Russia. We think this is the most logical next step, in part because the United States and Russia still hold 90% of the nuclear weapons around the world, and we encourage Russia to take up this offer. They have yet to do so. But there's more that could be done, and we'd like to see this review conference give encouragement to starting negotiations on a fissile material cutoff treaty, which has been on the NPT and international agenda for many years, but it's been difficult to get the negotiations started in Geneva at the Conference on Disarmament, but we think it's time to get going on that. The Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty should be brought into force globally. That still remains an interest of the United States and a priority of the U.S. administration for the United States to eventually ratify this treaty. We have supported the protocols to nuclear weapon-free zones, which provide a protocol that's open to the nuclear weapon states, and it says that they will not use or threaten to use nuclear weapons against regional states. This is something that we would like to pursue, and we have. We have signed 4 of the regional treaty protocols, and we're trying to be in position to sign the 5th, which is a treaty in Southeast Asia, the Bangkok Treaty, and we're continuing to discuss with the Southeast Asian countries how we might get to a position of being able to sign.
Are you expecting to have a bilateral meeting with Russia on the disarmament?
We talk to Russia very frequently, all the time, on nuclear issues relating to the NPT, and I can assure you that will continue at this review conference.
All right, before we go to D.C., we'll take one more from here.
Thank you very much. It's Pamela Falk from CBS News. One quick follow-up, which is that, Ambassador, when President Obama first came into office at the Security Council as president, he got a non-proliferation resolution passed. Do you expect to go back at any point to the Security Council? So that's the follow-up. I know you don't deal specifically with the Iran negotiations. Nonetheless, can you just address the question of how much coordination there has been between the U.S. and the IAEA, since there are many, many pieces of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that ask the IAEA to be involved? Thank you.
With respect to the UN Security Council, there was a resolution, 1887, that was passed early in the administration in 2009. Supported, of course, by the full UN Security Council and all of the permanent members. We don't have plans to return to seek an additional resolution at this time. We think it sets a good template for progress on all of the issues in front of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, whether that deals with arms control or disarmament or even peaceful uses. And I'm sure all of those issues will be subject to discussion and consideration for possible recommendations coming out of this review conference. In terms of the Iran discussions, the IAEA, of course, is an important partner. That was made clear in the parameters that the United States released following the discussions in Switzerland, and I expect that will continue.
Go ahead, Washington. Please ask your question, Washington.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Good. My name is Wada. I'm Japan's Mainichi newspaper. Ambassador, thank you very much for doing this. Let me first ask you about the U.S. effort to modernize its nuclear forces. Some people, it's true that the United States is reducing the number and importance of nuclear weapons, but at the same time, you're trying to modernize all 3 pillars of nuclear forces, and some people criticize it as running counter to the spirit of the announcement by President Obama that he is seeking a war with the nuclear weapons. How would you counter to that kind of criticism? And also about CTBT, how are you going to persuade the Senate to make any movement on this issue at all? Also about Russia, you accuse the country of violating INF Treaty. Is there any movement on that front on the negotiation with the Russians over this issue? Thank you.
Thank you. All good questions, and I'm glad you mentioned the modernization point, because I failed to return to that to an earlier question. With respect to the U.S. nuclear stockpile, the President in 2010 endorsed the Nuclear Posture Review, which contained a number of elements that support our broad policy of reducing nuclear dangers and making progress toward a world without nuclear weapons, recognizing that's a very long-term goal. The President made clear that we will maintain nuclear weapons as long as they exist, but we would work very aggressively to reduce the numbers and the role of nuclear weapons in our military strategy. And if you go back to the Nuclear Posture Review, you'll see that that's in evidence in a number of areas. We made clear, for example, that the fundamental role of nuclear weapons is to deter nuclear attacks from others. So we're trying to minimize the potential use of nuclear weapons as part of our military strategy. The President also said that we will not pursue new nuclear warheads or new military capabilities for our nuclear weapons So the so-called modernization activities that you note are principally focused on maintaining the existing arsenal or servicing the existing arsenal and not pursuing new nuclear warheads or new advanced types of nuclear weapons. A comprehensive test ban treaty would constrain such developments and make that a legal requirement for any state that is a party to the CTBT. And I can tell you that the CTBT is not an issue that has been sort of well understood in the American system for a number of years. It had been off the agenda. So our goal currently is to try to educate constituencies about the national security and international security value of a CTBT so that eventually the Senate might take this up and provide its advice and consent to ratification. With respect to Russia and the INF treaty, we continue to pursue discussion with Russia. We've made very clear that we believe Russia is in violation of the treaty. The opportunity for discussions remains open to Russia to take, should it wish to. But I don't know that this issue will become a major one at this particular non-proliferation treaty review conference.
Joelle Metcalf, Asahi Shimbun. I was just wondering, what does the United States want to see done with Article 10? There seems to be a lot of talk about it, especially among the NOM states. And so I was just wondering if you could relay your position on if you wanted to see something done in a consensus agreement on Article 10, what would it be?
Yes, thanks for the question. So Article 10 of the NPT provides the right of states to withdraw from the treaty under certain circumstances. It's a very standard clause that's built into all international agreements, certainly in the arms control arena. We don't wish to change that right. It's important to the United States that we have that right, and for any state that comes into the NPT that it have that right should circumstances require withdrawal. What we would like to do is to see the NPT membership talk about the consequences that might follow if a state abuses that right, as North Korea did at least 10 years ago. North Korea announced its intent to leave the treaty, but only after it had violated the treaty. That's one potential abuse of the withdrawal right. Another one might be if a country leaves the treaty and then takes peaceful nuclear supplies that it had received from exporters and uses that to fashion a nuclear program of some sort. So we as a community of NPT states, I think, ought to think hard about what potential consequences might follow if a state does abuse that right. And we'll be talking about various aspects of that throughout the review conference. I think it's been an issue that has very much been on the table since North Korea announced it was departing in 2003, and we think there is space for consensus on this point.
Joseph Klein, Canada Free Press. I just want to follow up on an earlier question relating to Iran in particular, and whether there's any concern that in the event that a final agreement is reached along the parameters set forth in the fact sheet, that after a certain period of time, even under those parameters, Iran could, at least theoretically, move forward to develop nuclear arms with the enrichment program that they'll have in place, and what the impact of that would be on surrounding countries who have said that they very well may then develop their own nuclear weapons. That would just run counter to non-proliferation. And related to that, could you comment if Iran subscribes to the protocol to the treaty, what in the view of the U.S. constitutes robust, unfettered inspection by the IAEA? Thank you.
Well, we are at a very delicate point in the discussions between the P5+1 states and Iran, and we wish to see those negotiations succeed. I will not comment on any aspect of those negotiations while they're underway. The work is is being pursued in Vienna, and I can assure you there will be a very intensive effort to reach an agreed conclusion to those negotiations at the end of June. We very much hope they succeed because the path that Iran currently had been on, which was to maintain a capability to build nuclear weapons, perhaps quickly, can be avoided through this agreement. So we think this agreement is very much, if the agreement is realized through the final negotiations, it would very much support the Non-Proliferation Treaty's goals and perhaps address one of its most serious crises and challenges to the future and to the integrity of the NPT, one that we've been dealing with for now a number of years. So I think the agreement and the prospect for an agreement will certainly be one that is discussed at this review conference. I can imagine that NPT parties will wish to give this process encouragement because it's our best hope for a diplomatic resolution to a very serious challenge.
Thank you. Olga Denisova from RIA Novosti, Russian News Agency. Ambassador, just the follow-up of the Iranian talks. Are you expecting some consultations and between P5+1 or bilateral talks on the sidelines of this NPT conference that starts in a couple of days? Thank you.
Yes. Well, discussions have started and they're underway in Vienna. And I expect that process to continue wherever the parties find the opportunity to continue their discussions.
Thank you. Is this on? George Baumgarten, correspondent for Jewish newspapers in North America. With reference to your proposed nuclear-free zone in the Middle East, you have two countries there, Israel, which is a assumed or supposed nuclear power, and Iran, which is by any stretch of the imagination a threshold nuclear power, shall we say. What are you doing in any of your delegates' or representatives' statements or assertions to emphasize the distinction between a state that threatens to wipe out another neighbor state and a state that makes no such statements? And secondarily, what are you doing to encourage and support the IAEA to see to it that they have the opportunity and the inclination to engage in absolutely robust inspections?
Well, on the first question, you referenced it as our proposed zone. The proposal emanates from the region. This has been an idea that Egypt in particular has championed over the years, and Egypt in particular that sought agreement to hold this initial conference as an outcome from the last NPT review conference. We'd like to encourage and find ways to bring this Egyptian idea to bear, at least by starting a discussion that involves all states in the Middle East. And that's what we have been trying to do over the last couple of years, and we'll continue to do it because we think it is an important first step along a very long path toward achieving a Middle East zone free of all weapons of mass destruction and systems for their delivery. I would suggest that there are differences between Iran and Israel, and I wouldn't want to draw an easy comparison. Iran has violated commitments that it undertook in the NPT to not pursue nuclear weapons. And we continue to find ways to address that through the P5+1 process. That is what it's aiming toward, to bring Iran back into compliance with commitments that it violated. Israel has never signed the NPT. It's not in violation of any agreement. But we do support, as a long-term matter, a non-proliferation treaty that enjoys the participation of all states in the world. And the means for getting there in the Middle East over time will be through a regional process that all states in the region buy into and work hard to make a success. This is a path, as I say, that will likely be quite long, but we need to make a start somewhere. And that is why we have offered our services to support the convening of an initial conference of states in the region.
Thank you. Greg Beck from Tokyo Broadcasting System. You mentioned earlier about Article 10, North Korea. Were you hoping through the NPT conference to seek some further penalties or some actual action toward North Korea? And is this at all in relation to the recent news that China has updated the U.S. that North Korea may have doubled their nuclear potential?
Well, with respect to North Korea and what we might expect from this review conference, I would like to see an outcome in which NPT parties urge North Korea to return to compliance with its commitments, including commitments made in the six-party talk process, and to discourage North Korea from taking additional provocative steps, whether that might be a nuclear test or further ballistic missile tests. We think that's a reasonable approach for a review conference to take. In terms of particular measures or penalties, I think that is best addressed through the UN Security Council process. But what we will encourage and would like to see is a return to the diplomatic process under the six-party talk framework, which would lead North Korea to meet its commitment to abandon all of its nuclear programs. That was the commitment it made to the world, and it should keep. In the back.
Hi, my name is Kazuhiko Kusano from Japan's Mainichi newspapers. I have two questions, and it's kind of some follow-up on his question. And can we expect some joint P5 new initiative or announcement to meet the frustration of the non-nuclear weapon states? And one more question is, I think at the beginning of the last review conference, Secretary Clinton announced that the number of the stockpile of nuclear warhead the first time. So do you, as the U.S. government, can we expect new announcement or surprise from the U.S. government?
Thank you. With respect to the P5 and steps we may take, I can tell you that the P5 as a group have been meeting almost continuously since the 2010 review conference. We have started a process of annual conferences that have been hosted in a rotating capital of the P5 states, most recently in London in 2015, and the next conference will be hosted by France soon. So we use this process to attempt to discuss and think of opportunities to strengthen the Non-Proliferation Treaty. We use it as a process to discuss our various approaches to nuclear weapons and to arms control and to verification. And we think it's a useful process that I am sure will continue. The process has yielded a glossary of terms that will be released at this review conference, which China, in fact, had led the development of. They led the P5 working group to assess this, I'm sorry, not to assess, but to draft this set of terms and to circulate it and develop it with all the other P5 states. And what the glossary can help do is build a more common framework for discussion of concepts and terms that are important to future arms control measures as well as to implementation of the NPT. So we will continue that process. And Secretary Kerry will deliver the U.S. speech at the opening debate on Monday, and we'll see what's in it.
Hi, this is Arun Lewis from Indo-Asian News Service. The U.S. has supported India's membership of the Nuclear Suppliers Group, which some see as a dilution of the NPT. How if you see this issue coming up at the NPT review, and is it likely to be one of the issues raised there? Thanks.
I don't know that it will be an issue that is raised at the review conference. If it is, we're certainly prepared to address it. The Civil Nuclear Cooperation Initiative with India is not one that the United States owns. There was agreement among the Nuclear Suppliers Group several years ago to permit nuclear trade with India, and that's a group of almost 50 countries. So the idea behind it is that India is a state with a very advanced nuclear energy program and serious energy needs, and it is a state that has a good track record on non-proliferation. It has not proliferated nuclear weapons or nuclear technologies to other states, and that we would use the agreement and this initiative as a way to further strengthen India's non-proliferation record and to bring it into the mainstream of nations.
My name is Mushfiqul Fazal. I'm from Bangladesh. The Wall Street Journal reported that Chinese nuclear experts have warned that North Korea may already have 20 nuclear warheads and the capability to produce enough weapons-grade uranium to double its arsenal by next year. So how you will address these issues in the summit?
Well, I will not comment on intelligence matters, and I don't think that's the most pertinent issue in any case. The question is whether we can relaunch a process, a diplomatic process that brings North Korea into discussions on ways to meet the commitments that North Korea itself made, which was to abandon all of its nuclear programs. The United States has been clear that we're prepared to resume such discussions provided they are authentic, they get at the entirety of the North Korean nuclear program, and they will lead to the complete, irreversible, and verified elimination of nuclear programs in North Korea.
If there are no further questions, that concludes our briefing. We have one more question.
Thank you. Could you a little bit touch on the issue of the inhumanity of the nuclear weapons? U.S. participated the conference late last year for the first time, and do you think this issue will bring about a positive influence on the negotiations, or will it, deepen the division between the nuclear states and non-nuclear powers when not all the nuclear weapon states participated?
Yes. Thank you. The question of the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons is one that has gained significant attention through a series of conferences that were held in the last 2 or 3 years. The United States does not dispute the notion that nuclear weapons, if ever used, would have devastating consequences. These are hugely destructive weapons. And it's that fact that underpins the entire U.S. effort to reduce nuclear danger, whether through strengthened measures in the Non-Proliferation Treaty, reduction of nuclear weapons around the world, securing nuclear material and facilities so that terrorists can't get access to these materials. So it really is the basis for everything that we do and stand for with respect to non-proliferation and disarmament. The question is how one gets to the end point, and I think it's an end point, the world without nuclear weapons, that we all share. The United States takes the view that progress toward the goal will have to come along a step-by-step pathway, with each step building on the last and perhaps creating additional opportunities for new steps that could be taken. The next step that we believe would be logical to take would be another round of nuclear reductions negotiated between the United States and Russia, and to pursue the Fissile Material Cutoff Treaty and the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, bringing that the Test Ban Treaty into force as foundational agreements to make further progress, because it's inconceivable that the world will move to many fewer numbers of nuclear weapons unless there is a legal and verified cap on production of fissile material for weapons or for nuclear testing.
All right, thank you for attending today's briefing.
Thank you.